Thank you. We have a lot to talk about and a very short time to talk about it. Emran, I'm eager to talk to you about what can government actually do to mitigate the downside risks of AI. Robyn, I'm eager to talk to you about how can government use AI to just be better at what it does. But Guy, I think I have to start with you. Because you're in the defense business, you work for Palantir, but work closely with the UK government. In the last 48 hours, we've all seen on television a pretty extraordinary event. That Iran sent more than 300 drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, aimed straight at Israel. And we're told that 99% of them were shot out of the sky before they hit the ground, which is, if true, extraordinary. What does this event that we've all witnessed in the last 48 hours tell us about the changing face of national defense?
I think the thing that's really highlighted for me is if you go back in time, only not even 10 years, but say four, maybe even 3, military operations are all about the speed of decision making, or decisions at the speed of relevance, I think is a term often used. And historically, we've seen things like, if you go all the way to before something's launched, it might be looking at satellite imagery to understand what things have moved, what changes have taken place. Now, with the introduction of computer vision models, you're able to take a 2 kilometer by 5 kilometer image and within a second identify all of the things that you might be interested in, whether it's changed or whether it is something that you recognize. Historically, that might have taken an analyst hours to get to that point on one single image. And now you're able to take thousands of images.
300 of them in a pretty limited time.
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea of identifying where these things might be coming from and deciding, yeah, these are the ones of interest, and then maybe tasking things, like collection assets that you might have, which could be sensitive or what have you, and then passing that structured data through a model to then understand what are the interesting things that you care about, or the things that might be good indicators and warnings.
So it's a sea change.
What, sorry?
It is a sea change.
Totally. The compression of decision-making times has been...
You were directly involved, my understanding is you were directly involved in working with Ukraine to very much the same weaponry, by the way, both the offensive weaponry and the defensive weaponry that Russia was using against Ukraine. What did you learn in that experience?
The Ukraine example is fascinating and very unique in the fact that you have seen a complete tech sector nationalized into the defense sector, and the speed of change that they've been able to deliver in terms of transformation and the use of AI and other technologies has been incredible.
Well, they had some help.
Yeah, a little help, yeah. But I mean, again, one of the earlier commentators was talking about the getting your data in a healthy place to then run the models across it, and that's a very important part.
The thing is, we're fortunate in both of those cases that the defensive capabilities were so strong, but these are going to empower offensive capabilities as well, right? I mean, it's going to be a race.
Yeah, I think the idea of strategic competition is definitely with us, and I think in terms of governments investing into future technologies and AI is going to be pretty game-changing and deterministic.
Emran, I want to back up a little bit and get to the broader question of what AI means for governments, which is the question you wrestle with every day in your position with the UK government. I guess the thing, and someone said this from the stage earlier today, is this is moving so fast, so fast. How can government hope to keep up with the pace of change and mitigate the negative consequences in any way?
Yeah, and so a big part of our approach has been to do things differently. So we've been much more open to bringing in expertise from outside of government than perhaps sometimes we are as government. So we've brought in lots of expertise from AI firms, from academia, including Ian Hogarth, who chairs our AI Safety Institute, who I think was speaking earlier in the conference. And we've been much more open to that expertise than sometimes we are as government. We've also moved really, really quickly. And in order to move as quickly as that, you really need political support all the way up to the top of government, and we've absolutely had that. We've had a Prime Minister who's chosen to prioritize this set of issues, and in particular, he lent into saying that the UK would host the first AI Safety Summit, which we ran in November last year. And I think that's another important lesson for us in terms of dealing with some of the risks or some of the potential downsides of artificial intelligence. We've got to do it with other governments. We've got to do this together. We've got to build international governance around this. And that's why it's been so important to us to kind of begin to lead that conversation. So we hosted the first summit last year. We're co-hosting the next summit with Korea next month. We are also trying to collaborate really extensively on AI safety testing with other countries. So our AI Safety Institute just signed a partnership agreement with the same institute in the US. And we're talking to these capabilities as they begin to be developed in other countries as well. So kind of that collaborative approach, I think, is really fundamental.
And so what are sort of the top 3 things that you think you can accomplish with this AI safety effort?
So I think the first thing is to bind this set of countries together, to build that connective tissue between the countries which have frontier AI firms and which you would expect to be at the frontier of AI being deployed across the wider economy. I think the second thing I'd say is there's still a lot to do in terms of understanding the science of AI safety. So there's a lot of discussion about what's the right approach to regulating frontier AI. Our view has been that the best thing to do first is to figure out what does good AI safety testing look like and set standards for that, and to do that in collaboration with other people who are at the frontier of doing that work. And that's what the AI Safety Institute has been focused on. We want to understand what really good safety testing looks like, do that in collaboration with the firms, and do that in collaboration with other countries.
And is the end result you give a seal of approval to certain models and not to others? What does this look like 5 or 10 years down the road?
I think it's hard at this point to say what it looks like 5 or 10 years down the road. I think our approach at the moment is let's establish the basic science. Let's figure out what good safety testing looks like. And alongside that, let's use our existing regulatory system for the harms that are manifesting potentially here and now. And I think that's another important part of our approach. The digital markets that we're talking about here are markets that we already regulate in important ways. We have just passed legislation to allow us to better regulate for harms that occur online. Many of those harms will now also be created with AI, but we've just regulated for that. So we should use that regulatory framework to deal with AI-generated harms in the same way as we were planning to use it for other things.
Yeah. Robyn, you're working from a different angle on these issues. You're trying to figure out how can AI make government better at what it does. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and where you're seeing results?
Yeah, so the perspective I bring to this is running Apolitical, which is a global network used by about 250,000 public servants. We also do online training, and as part of that, we have a government AI campus, and we've trained already about 10,000 public officials around the world. So that's our lens. The headlines are the potential is immense. The Turing Institute came out with a report recently which speaks to this in the UK context, but it's generalizable. There are about 1 billion transactions a year between government and citizens. About 140 million of those are complex but repeatable tasks. And of those, the Institute estimates that about 84% can be automated with AI. So incredible potential to cut into the work of government, improve citizen services, improve the return on taxpayer dollars. There's also a secondary reason for doing this and for adopting AI, because better users of AI are better regulators of AI, and they're better buyers of AI. And I think the UK really has shown leadership on the general adoption front in government as well.
And is there a willingness to do this? Gets back to the retraining issue we were talking about a few minutes ago. Is there a willingness in government to really embrace the effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very interesting to look at government's current status, sort of position on AI. First of all, somewhat surprisingly, your average public servant, we've done a lot of polling on this, is more positive than negative on the potential of AI. That doesn't hold necessarily for prior technologies. And given all the talk about concerns, we've been surprised how generally optimistic they are. There is much more optimism in emerging markets versus developed markets. The conversation in emerging markets is all about this is going to solve personalized education, this is going to bring great healthcare. The conversation in developed markets tends to have much more of a bent to work towards safety and harms. And economic nationalism is also becoming a more and more important force. Sorry, AI nationalism rather, and we've seen big plays recently in the UAE and India, and expect to see many more around the world. So all those are context for adoption, but there is general willingness to use it. The vast majority of public servants have already played with generative AI, sometimes, I think, under approved guidance, probably sometimes somewhat off the books. And that's only going to increase pretty dramatically.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned economic nationalism, because one of the things that makes this conversation about geopolitical effects interesting and challenging is the existence of China, not represented on this stage. China is certainly an AI superpower. There are some people out there who seem to think it will become the leading AI superpower. And it has a very different background set of values. It could be on the other side of any actual warfare. It takes a very different approach to many of the questions. To use a simple example, the UK has said very clearly, we're not going to use facial recognition or other technologies to pick people out in a massive crowd crossing the street. I believe China's done the exact opposite, say that we can make great gains in social cohesion if we have the ability to do that. So how does China's strength in AI affect these conversations? Emran, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so our approach has been to include China in the international conversation about safety. So China will represent it at the AI Safety Summit in Bletchley Park. And we think that's important because China produces a lot of fundamental research in AI, and it has a very busy and a very active and a very interesting AI ecosystem. So having China as part of this conversation we think is important. But at the same time, we've been really clear as a government that where China is engaged in activities that affect or harm UK interests, we will say so clearly and plainly. So we've done that in the past few weeks. We have called out where China has been engaged in offensive cyber operations in the UK. And we think that those two things are entirely consistent.
Well, there are a lot of people in the US these days who think maybe they aren't consistent, and that should we be sharing all our research with China if we're going to be in conflict over whether it's cyber or actual warfare?
Yeah, and that's why our approach will not be to share all of our research with China. We're very clear on there are areas of research
That you will protect.
That we will protect and that we do protect.
Robyn, how do you think about this?
Well, we're looking very much at the practice, the applied side of AI in government. And one of the interesting general omissions, I think there's a general omission around thinking around capability in governments. There's a lot of talk about we must do this. There's a lot of talk about adoption, but there isn't the focus on building the kind of diffusion capability so you can actually roll it out across government. So we look at that, and then we look at how the exchange of best practice happens, because the field is moving so fast. Yeah. You are never going to win if you just take top-down guidance or directives. You've got to talk to others who are in the field. And I think one of the interesting dynamics is actually the vast majority of countries are quite good at collaborating and sharing best practice. We see a lot of that on our platform. China kind of doesn't take part, for the most part, explicitly, or at least in the same way, in that sharing of best practice. So the question I'm interested in is there going to be a siloing around how AI is rolled out in the Chinese government versus elsewhere? And should we be trying to get more permeability so there can be mutual learning around non-controversial things like how do you get great services to citizens? How do you bring down the carbon footprint of these AI technologies? We heard about that earlier.
Yep. And Guy, in defense, how do you think about China?
Well, I mean, as you pointed out, that facial recognition is reportedly like fantastic, but when it comes to things like large language models, apparently there's a slight limitation because they restrict elements of the internet available to specific areas. So there is a theory that they might be slightly behind, but to pick up Robyn's point there, I think what's really important is almost not ignoring it, but just more internal focused of looking at an organization and in parallel to the military and the safety side is like, how do you really push the use of these technologies to win? Like, what are you doing day in, day out to make the most of this tech to actually improve your work? And there's often this concern about losing jobs, but we like to view it as in a Marvel context of Team Iron Man versus Team Ultron. And it's how do you bring this technology to humans so that they can be 1,000 times better at their job, and with the view to how you actually win in the long run.
Was that a national defense answer?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think whether you're an analyst working in defense intelligence, if you're an operational commander, it's how do you bring all this technology
But you have to be thinking about, do their capabilities match ours? Are our capabilities superior? That's the nature of defense.
And I think that's the important thing of balancing the innovation and driving innovation forward in parallel to the safety side, rather than letting the safety side restrict what you do in terms of innovation.
Okay, last question I'd like to ask all of you to answer. If AI ran the government, what would we be doing differently today? What would we be doing that we aren't doing? And I'm going to make you go first.
We'd be doing meaningful work, not busy work. Would be my blunt answer.
Still too much busy work in government.
I think it's very hard.
And AI can help us get rid of it.
I hope so. Yeah.
Robyn.
So there's been some data suggesting, this is an aside, that a majority of people, I think it's younger people in Europe, actually want AI politicians. So they want AI to run the government.
As opposed to the politicians.
As opposed to the flesh and blood ones of today. So coming to a government sooner than you may think. But in terms of what that would look like, assuming it's benevolent and aligned AI, I think the potential, the dream is that you get much better, much more personalized services, very hyper-personalized services to citizens, and you can invest a lot more in those because you are saving money because of so many efficiencies that you're also finding.
Emran, final word.
Yeah, I'd add, I think government is a complex activity and it's too often connoted as being an elite activity. And I think AI gives us some real opportunities to deal with that. I think the way in which AI can help to simplify and explain things to citizens, I think has real power to it. I think the way in which it can help to simplify interactions with citizens, I think has real power to it. So I think breaking down that elitism that I think a lot of people experience in their interactions with government, I think AI can help us with that.
Well, thank you all. You've given us a lot to think about. Thanks for being part of Brainstorm AI.